Why do you feel guilty for desires you never asked to have? While the world condemns you for that cigarette after stress, for the glass of wine that calms your anxiety, or for the procrastination that paralyzes you before big decisions, there's a disturbing truth hidden in the shadows of your psyche. Your vices are not moral failures, they are messengers. Carl Jung discovered something that religions tried to hide for centuries. What you reject within yourself doesn't disappear. It grows. It gains strength. It transforms into symptoms. And what if I told you that each compulsion, each escape, each weakness you carry is actually an encrypted code from your soul trying to wake you up? The chosen ones are not perfect. They are those brave enough to descend into their own internal hell and discover that the demon had a message. Your vices are not the problem. They are the map. And you're about to learn how to read it. There exists within you a room you were taught never to enter. From childhood, every authority figure in your life handed you the same instruction. Lock away the ugly parts, hide the shameful desires, pretend the darkness doesn't exist. Your parents did it. Your teachers reinforced it. Society built entire systems around this single idea that goodness means erasure of everything deemed unacceptable. But here's what nobody told you. That locked room doesn't stay empty. It becomes a living thing. Jung called this the shadow, and it's not some mystical concept reserved for therapy sessions or philosophical debates. It's the collection of every part of yourself you've been trained to reject. Every time you felt anger but smiled instead, that anger didn't vanish into thin air. Every moment you wanted to scream but stayed silent, that scream found a home somewhere inside you. Every impulse you labeled as bad, every thought you classified as sinful, every desire you deemed unworthy of acknowledgement went straight into that room. And what happens to living things when you lock them away in darkness? They adapt, they survive, they find other ways to make themselves known. Your vices are not random weaknesses that appeared out of nowhere. They are your shadow speaking in the only language it has left. When you reach for that third cup of coffee, even though your hands are already shaking, when you scroll through your phone at 3 in the morning knowing you need sleep, when you pick fights with people you love over things that don't really matter, you're not being weak. You're being spoken to. Something inside you is trying so desperately to get your attention that it's willing to sabotage your own peace to do it. Most people spend their entire lives running from this truth. They create elaborate systems of control, build walls of discipline, construct identities based entirely on being the opposite of their shadow. The businessman who works 80 hours a week isn't driven by ambition alone. He's running from the part of himself that feels worthless without achievement. The person who can't stop helping others to their own detriment isn't just kind. They're avoiding the uncomfortable truth that they don't know who they are when nobody needs them. The perfectionist who rearranges the same closet 5 times isn't detail-oriented. They're terrified of the chaos they feel inside. Here's where it gets interesting. Jung discovered that the people who try hardest to be good, who build the highest walls against their shadow, often become the most destructive. Not because they're bad people, but because the shadow grows more powerful in proportion to how much you deny it. It's like holding a beach ball underwater. The harder you push, the more force builds up. And when you finally lose your grip, and you will lose your grip eventually, that beach ball doesn't just surface, it explodes upward with all the energy you used to suppress it. This is why the most judgmental people are often hiding the exact things they condemn in others. The politician railing against certain behaviors while engaging in them secretly. The religious leader preaching purity while battling inner demons. They're not hypocrites in the traditional sense. They're people at war with their own shadows, and that war always spills outward. What you can't accept in yourself, you'll attack in others. What you refuse to see in your own mirror, you'll notice immediately in everyone else's reflection. But you're different. The fact that you're here reading these words means something in you has already started to wake up. You've begun to notice that the battle against yourself isn't working. The guilt isn't making you better. The shame isn't transforming you into the person you think you should be. Instead, it's just making you tired, exhausted, split into pieces. And in that exhaustion, a question has started to form. What if there's another way? The chosen ones don't stumble into their calling because they're pure. They stumble into it because they're willing to look at what others refuse to see. They're the ones who finally get tired enough of the performance, sick enough of the splitting, brave enough to turn toward that locked room instead of away from it. They're the ones who realize that every vice, every compulsion, every escape mechanism is a breadcrumb trail leading back to something real, something true, something that's been waiting in the darkness all along, not to destroy them, but to complete them. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's the exile in your kingdom, banging on the walls, setting small fires, doing whatever it takes to remind you that wholeness requires integration, not amputation. Every vice is a small fire, and you've been treating fires like sins when they're actually signals. The question isn't how to put them out. The question is, what are they trying to show you? Now that you understand the shadow exists, you need to learn its language. This is where most people get stuck. They recognize they have issues, acknowledge their struggles, maybe even accept that their vices mean something deeper. But they stop there, treating symptoms like puzzles to solve instead of messages to decode. Your soul doesn't communicate in words. It communicates in urges, in cravings, in the exact behaviors you've been trying to eliminate. Think about the pattern of your own vices. They're not random. They appear at specific times, in response to specific triggers, following rhythms you've probably never stopped to map. The person who drinks every Friday night after a stressful work week isn't just craving alcohol. They're craving permission to stop performing. The one who binge eats in secret isn't hungry for food. They're starving for something they're not allowing themselves to have in daylight. The one who can't stop buying things they don't need isn't materialistic. They're trying to fill a void that has nothing to do with objects. Jung understood that symptoms are symbols. When your body creates physical pain without medical cause, it's speaking. When your mind generates anxiety that seems disproportionate to circumstances, it's communicating. When your behavior compulsively repeats patterns that harm you, it's showing you something. The mistake is treating the symbol as the problem. It's like seeing smoke and only focusing on the smoke, never looking for the fire. Every vice is a twisted version of a legitimate need. Aggression is passion without direction. Addiction is transcendence through the wrong door. Procrastination is protection against judgment. Overeating is hunger for emotional nourishment. Sexual compulsion is a search for connection or power or validation. Excessive work is a quest for worth. These aren't character flaws. They're solutions that stopped working, medicine that turned to poison, survival strategies from an earlier version of you that haven't gotten the memo that circumstances have changed. Here's what makes this crucial. Your soul knows exactly what it needs, but it's been shouted down for so long that it can only whisper through cracks in your armor. Those cracks are your vices. When you feel that pull towards something you know isn't good for you, when you experience that familiar craving, even though you promised yourself you'd stop, when you find yourself doing the thing again despite all your willpower and discipline and best intentions, something real is happening. Something true is trying to surface. Most people respond to this pull with force. They white-knuckle their way through cravings. They shame themselves into submission. They build elaborate reward systems and punishment protocols and accountability structures. And sometimes these work for a while. You can suppress a vice for days, weeks, months, even years. But suppression isn't transformation. It's just pushing the beach ball underwater again. The need doesn't disappear. It just finds a new vice, a different crack, another way to speak. This is why someone quits drinking only to become obsessed with exercise. Why someone stops overeating only to develop a spending problem. Why someone gives up one addiction only to fall into another. They changed the symptom without addressing the symbol. They silenced one messenger without hearing the message. The soul doesn't give up. It just gets more creative in its attempts to be heard. The breakthrough comes when you stop fighting and start listening. Not indulging, that's important to understand. Listening isn't the same as surrendering to every impulse. It's about pausing in that moment of craving and asking a different question. Not, how do I stop this? But what is this trying to tell me? Not, why am I so weak? But what part of me is so desperate that it's willing to use poison to get my attention? When you start asking these questions, patterns emerge. You notice that you reach for your vice when you feel powerless, or when you're avoiding something important, or when you've been performing for others too long without rest. You start to see that your Thursday night anxiety isn't about Thursday. It's about facing Friday. Your Sunday sadness isn't about the weekend ending. It's about the mask you have to put back on Monday. Your late-night scrolling isn't about the content you're consuming. It's about not wanting tomorrow to arrive. These realizations don't fix anything immediately. Understanding why you do something doesn't automatically stop you from doing it, but it changes the relationship. The vice stops being this shameful secret you're constantly battling and becomes information, data, a report from the front lines of your inner world about conditions you've been ignoring. And with information comes choice, real choice, not the illusion of choice that comes from willpower alone. The chosen ones are people who learn to decode their own suffering. They develop fluency in the language of their symptoms. They stop treating their struggles as proof of unworthiness and start treating them as navigation tools. Where does it hurt? What makes it worse? When does it quiet down? What does it want? These aren't questions that lead to indulgence. They're questions that lead to integration, to wholeness, to actually addressing the underlying need instead of just managing its symptoms. Your vices are your soul, screaming in the only voice it has left. The tragedy isn't that you have them. The tragedy is that you've been taught to silence them instead of translate them. Every craving is a sentence. Every compulsion is a paragraph. Every relapse is a whole chapter trying to tell you something about who you are and what you need and where you're meant to go. Stop burning the book, start reading it. There's a reason your specific vices are your vices and not someone else's. This isn't random assignment. This isn't bad luck or weak genetics or poor environment alone. There's a precision to the way your shadow manifests that most people never recognize. Jung spoke of this when he discussed how our greatest wounds become our greatest gifts, how the thing that breaks us is often exactly what's trying to make us. Your demons didn't show up to destroy you. They showed up because you're strong enough to face them. Consider how selective your struggles are. You don't battle every possible vice. You battle your specific set. Someone else can drink socially without issue while you can't stop at one, but they can't be alone for 5 minutes without anxiety while solitude fills you with peace. Your co-worker wastes money compulsively while you're naturally frugal, but you can't stop working while they have no problem relaxing. These aren't coincidences. These are assignments, custom-designed challenges that contain within them the exact curriculum your soul needs for evolution. The people who transform the most aren't the ones who had it easy. They're the ones who got dragged through their own personal hell and came out the other side with something nobody else could have found. The depth of your struggle corresponds to the height of your potential. This isn't positive thinking or motivation. This is pattern recognition. The recovering addict who becomes a counselor understands addiction in a way no textbook can teach. The person who battled depression for years and found their way out can guide others through darkness that happy people can't even see. The one who faced their demons doesn't just survive them, they gain their power. Your vices are showing you exactly where you're meant to grow. If you struggle with anger, you're being pushed to understand power and boundaries. If you battle addiction, you're being taught about transcendence and altered states and what you're really hungry for. If you can't stop people pleasing, you're being forced to find your real self underneath the performance. If you work compulsively, you're being asked to discover worth beyond achievement. These aren't punishments. They're invitations into territory you'd never explore otherwise. Most people reject the invitation. They spend their lives wishing they had different struggles, comparing their demons to others and deciding they got the worst deal. They fantasize about how much easier life would be if they just didn't have to deal with their particular issues. But this fantasy misses the entire point. Your struggles aren't obstacles to your path. They are the path. Remove them and you'd be someone else entirely, walking a completely different road toward a destination that has nothing to do with your actual purpose. The chosen ones are people who stop resisting their assignment. They don't romanticize their struggles or pretend they're easy, but they stop wishing they were someone else. They recognize that their specific demons chose them because they have the exact capacity needed to face them, not at the beginning. Nobody starts out ready, but the struggle itself builds the capacity. The weight of the challenge creates the strength required to lift it. You don't get strong and then face your demons. You face your demons and become strong. This is terrifying at first because it means your vices aren't going away. Not in the way you hoped. You might get sober, but the lessons alcohol was trying to teach you will still need learning. You might stop overeating, but the hunger underneath will still need feeding. You might quit the obvious vice, but the core issue will remain until you actually address it. The demon doesn't leave when you white-knuckle your way to 90 days clean. It leaves when you finally understand why it came. Think of it like this. Your vice is a teacher that showed up in your life disguised as an enemy. It has something you need, information you're lacking, a piece of yourself you've been missing. But it won't just hand it over. It makes you work for it. It pushes you to your limits. It breaks you down and forces you to rebuild. It strips away everything false until only truth remains. This process is brutal. It's supposed to be. Easy lessons don't stick. Comfortable growth isn't growth at all. The things that change you are the things that nearly destroy you. But here's the promise hidden in the pain. When you finally face your demon directly, when you stop running and turn around and ask it what it wants, when you're willing to sit with the discomfort and actually listen instead of just react, something shifts. The energy that was being used to maintain the war becomes available for something else. The part of you that was split off and exiled and forced to speak through symptoms can finally come home. And when it does, it doesn't come back empty-handed. It brings gifts, perspective, depth, compassion, power, the exact qualities you needed all along. Your demon knows you better than you know yourself. It sees your potential. It recognizes your strength. It understands that you're capable of more than the safe, comfortable, approved version of life you were settling for. So it shows up and ruins everything. It makes the comfortable unbearable. It exposes the performance as fake. It forces you out of the nest. And yes, that means falling. Yes, that means pain. Yes, that means facing exactly what you've been avoiding, but it also means flight. Real flight, not the pretend version where you stay safely on the ground while imagining what sky feels like. The chosen ones aren't chosen because they're special in the beginning. They're chosen because they're willing to become special through the fire. They're the ones who recognize that their demons are demands for greatness disguised as destruction. They're the ones who understand that the vice isn't the point. The transformation waiting on the other side of the vice is the point, and they're willing to walk through hell to get there. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. Here's an uncomfortable truth that shatters everything you were taught about goodness and change. and making a difference. The people who actually transform the world, who create real lasting change, who drag humanity forward into new territory, are never the pure ones. They're never the people who played by all the rules, stayed inside all the lines, maintained perfect virtue throughout their lives. They're the ones who went to the edge, looked over, often fell off, and came back with something nobody else could bring. The saints make everyone comfortable. The sinners make everyone grow. Look at history without the sanitizing filter. Every revolutionary, every artist who changed their field, every leader who actually moved society forward had a shadow they wrestled with publicly. Their struggles weren't secret shame they hid away. Their darkness was part of their power. They created from their wounds. They led from their scars. They taught from their failures. The clean version of change is a myth sold to keep people small and manageable and approved. Real change is messy. It comes from people who've been to places polite society pretends don't exist. This isn't celebration of vice for vice's sake. It's recognition of a pattern you can verify yourself. The writer who never experienced pain produces shallow work. The leader who never faced their own darkness can't guide others through theirs. The teacher who learned everything from books but nothing from struggle has information but no wisdom. You can't give what you don't have. You can't light a path you've never walked, and you can't transform anyone beyond the level you've transformed yourself. The saints, the people who maintain perfect virtue and never struggle and keep their hands completely clean, they serve a function. They remind us ideals exist. They show us what's possible at the highest levels of discipline. They provide examples of purity, but they don't change things. They preserve things. They maintain traditions. They keep systems running. And there's value in that. But it's not transformation, it's conservation. The world needs both, but only one pushes humanity into new territory. Think about who actually helps you when you're struggling. Not who you're supposed to respect, or who looks good from a distance, but who actually reaches you when you're in darkness. It's not the person who never fell. It's the person who fell harder than you and found a way back. It's not the one with the perfect track record. It's the one with the scars that match your wounds. It's not the saint on the pedestal. It's the sinner who sat in the same mud you're sitting in and figured out how to stand. This is why your vices don't disqualify you from your purpose. They're part of your preparation for it, the things you're ashamed of, the struggles nobody knows about, the private battles you fight every day. These aren't making you unworthy of your calling. They're building your capacity for it. You're being trained in territory that people who never struggled will never understand. You're developing muscles that don't grow in comfort. You're gaining access to depths that surface-level living never reaches. The world doesn't need more people pretending to be perfect. It's drowning in performance and fakeness and carefully curated versions of human experience that leave out everything real. What the world needs, what people are desperately hungry for, is someone willing to be honest about the struggle. Someone who can say, I've been there, it's dark, it's terrifying, and here's what I found that you can't see from where you're standing. That voice doesn't come from saints. It comes from people who've been to hell and back. Your vices are giving you credibility you don't even recognize yet. Every time you face your demon and choose differently, you're not just changing yourself. You're becoming qualified to guide others through the same territory. Every time you translate your symptoms into insight, you're developing language that can reach people the approved vocabulary never touches. Every time you integrate another piece of your shadow instead of just suppressing it, you're building wholeness that radiates outward and gives others permission to do the same. This is why the most powerful teachers often have the messiest pasts. Why the most effective leaders frequently have public failures in their history. Why the artists who create work that actually matters tend to have complicated private lives. They're not succeeding despite their darkness. They're succeeding because of what they learned by facing it. The struggle gave them something to say. The vice gave them somewhere to speak from. The shadow gave them depth. But here's the critical distinction. This isn't license to indulge every impulse and call it growth. This isn't permission to harm yourself or others and claim it's all part of the journey. The difference between a vice that's destroying you and a vice that's teaching you comes down to one thing: consciousness. Are you aware of what's happening? Are you learning from it? Are you translating the experience into wisdom or just repeating the pattern mindlessly? The chosen ones aren't people who never struggle. They're people who struggle consciously, who extract meaning from their pain, who refuse to waste their suffering. The saints maintain the temple, the sinners build new ones. Both matter, but only one group knows what it costs to create something that's never existed before. Only one group has the scars that prove they're qualified to lead people through transformation, instead of just talking about it from a safe distance. Your vices aren't keeping you from your purpose. They're revealing it. The question is whether you're brave enough to stop hiding them and start harvesting them for everything they're trying to give you. Every impulse you have is information, not random electrical firing, not meaningless chemical reactions, not evidence of moral failure, information, precise, specific data about your internal state, your unmet needs, your buried truth. The problem is you were never taught to read the code. You were taught to judge it, suppress it, fight it, but never actually decode it. Learning this language is the difference between being controlled by your vices and being informed by them. Start with the simplest observation. Your impulses have patterns. They're not constant. They spike at certain times in response to certain triggers, following rhythms you can map if you pay attention. The craving that hits every afternoon at 3 isn't about 3 o'clock. It's about what 3 o'clock represents in your day. The urge that surfaces every Sunday night isn't about Sundays. It's about Mondays. The compulsion that only appears when you're alone isn't about solitude. It's about what you do when nobody's watching. These patterns are the first layer of code. When does the impulse appear? What happened right before it? What are you feeling in your body? What thoughts are running through your mind? What situation are you in or about to face? Most people skip this investigation entirely. They feel the craving and immediately move to resistance or surrender, fight it or give in. But both responses miss the message. The impulse is trying to tell you something before you ever decide what to do about it. Second layer, what does the vice promise? Not what it delivers. Promises are different from results. The promise is what hooks you. The gambler isn't chasing money, they're chasing the feeling of possibility, of maybe this time of hope in a world that otherwise feels predetermined. The scroller isn't seeking information, they're seeking novelty, stimulation, the feeling that something interesting might appear any second. The workaholic isn't pursuing success, they're pursuing the feeling of being needed, valuable, irreplaceable. The promise reveals the hunger. Third layer, what does the vice actually deliver? This is usually completely different from the promise, and that gap is crucial information. The drink promises relaxation but delivers numbness. The sugar promises comfort but delivers shame. The anger promises power but delivers isolation. The procrastination promises safety but delivers anxiety. When you map the gap between promise and delivery, you see clearly what you're actually trading. You're giving up what you really need in exchange for a counterfeit version that never satisfies. Fourth layer. What would happen if you sat with the impulse without acting on it? This is the practice nobody teaches, but everyone needs. When the craving appears, instead of fighting it or feeding it, you just observe it. Where do you feel it in your body? How strong is it on a scale of 1 to 10? What thoughts come with it? What emotions? How long does it last if you don't interfere with it at all? This practice reveals something shocking. Impulses aren't permanent. They rise and fall like waves. They peak and crash. They appear intensely and then fade, usually within minutes, if you don't feed them or fight them. This discovery changes everything because it proves your impulses don't control you unless you believe they do. The craving feels urgent and endless and absolutely necessary to address right now, but that's the code lying to you. It's like a fire alarm going off. It feels like an emergency. It demands immediate response. But when you check, there's often no fire, just smoke, just a signal that got amplified into a crisis. Learning to sit with impulses without reacting teaches you the difference between a real emergency and a false alarm. Fifth layer, what need is underneath the impulse? This is where real translation happens. The person reaching for their phone every 3 minutes isn't addicted to technology. They're avoiding discomfort with their own thoughts. The one who can't stop shopping isn't materialistic. They're trying to create feelings of newness or control in a life that feels stale or chaotic. The one who picks fights isn't angry. They're protecting against vulnerability or trying to feel something in a relationship that's gone numb. The vice is never the need. It's always a failed strategy to meet a legitimate need. When you identify the real need, you can meet it directly instead of through the broken translator of your vice. If you're lonely, the vice tells you to scroll social media, but the real solution is actual connection. If you're powerless, the vice tells you to control something trivial, but the real solution is finding where you do have power and using it. If you're empty, the vice tells you to fill yourself with substances or activities, but the real solution is discovering what actually nourishes you. The code isn't telling you to feed the vice, it's telling you what you're actually hungry for. Sixth layer. What is this impulse protecting you from? This is the deepest level and the most important. Every vice is a defense mechanism. It's protecting you from something you're not ready to face. The workaholic is avoiding intimacy or existential questions. The substance user is avoiding pain or processing trauma. The perfectionist is avoiding judgment or exposure of their real self. The people pleaser is avoiding rejection or their own needs. When you understand what you're protecting yourself from, you can finally ask if the protection is still necessary. Most of your defenses were built when you were younger and had fewer resources. They made perfect sense at the time. They kept you safe when you were vulnerable. But you're not that person anymore. You have capacities now that you didn't have then. You can handle things that would have destroyed you before. The code keeps running the old program because nobody told it the update is available. Your impulses are still trying to protect a version of you that doesn't need that protection anymore. Learning to read your impulses transforms them from enemies into allies. They stop being proof that you're broken and become evidence that part of you is trying to help, even if it's using outdated methods. You develop compassion for your own struggle instead of just shame. You recognize that every craving, every compulsion, every urge is an attempt at self-care that's going through the wrong channels. And with that recognition comes choice, real choice, not willpower, not discipline. Choice based on understanding what you actually need and finding better ways to get it. The chosen ones are fluent in their own code. They've done the hard work of translating their symptoms into language they can use. They don't just react to their impulses. They interrogate them. They decode them. They extract the wisdom buried in the craving and apply it to their actual lives. This doesn't make the impulses disappear, but it removes their power. A message that's been received doesn't need to keep repeating. A need that's been met doesn't keep screaming. The code quiets down when you finally learn to read it. Everything you've learned leads here, the moment you stop warring with yourself and start becoming whole. Guilt only works if you believe its story. That story claims you're broken, shameful, less than others who seem to have it figured out. Every word is a lie designed to keep you small. Your vices are proof of life. Proof that something in you refuses complete domestication. Dead things don't crave. Your struggle proves vitality, not failure. When you shift from guilt to curiosity, everything transforms. Guilt asks, "What's wrong with me?" Curiosity asks, "What is this teaching me?" Integration means bringing exiled parts home. The energy trapped in your vices isn't evil. It's raw life force that got twisted because it had nowhere healthy to go. The addict's hunger becomes spiritual seeking. The angry person's fire becomes passionate advocacy. The perfectionist's detail becomes mastery. This transformation happens through accepting deeper, not trying harder. Through treating your shadow like an abandoned child acting out for attention, not a demon needing destruction. The coronation happens when you realize you've been royalty all along. Every vice gave you territory and human experience that others never access. Every demon faced gave you authority in realms saints can't enter. You're not broken. You're deep. And depth is what transforms worlds. The chosen ones complete this shift. They've stopped hiding struggles and started harvesting them. They've transformed deepest shame into greatest strength. Your awakening isn't becoming someone else. It's becoming fully yourself, all of yourself, light and dark. When you integrate the whole instead of rejecting pieces, you don't just survive your calling. You rise crowned by everything you thought would destroy you. Your vices were never the problem. Your rejection of them was. Welcome them home. You were chosen because you were brave enough to face the darkness.